guess, New Haven, Connecticut, probably. And they were talking about this curious idea that emotions and rationality seem to be in conflict with one another. And then one of them, I guess Salovey, came up with, well, what if there is a kind of intelligence which is emotional intelligence? Are you hearing me now? Okay, thank you. So they thought they'd write a paper on that. Because at that time, in 1990, there'd been something like 40 years pretty sustained research. As I say, research on emotions goes back to Darwin in 1872. But since about 1950, there's been a growing wave of interest in psychology and psychiatry and anthropology, in neuroscience on emotions. And here's the kind of thing. As part of this research, it had been discovered by Paul Ekman and others that there was a limited number of facial expressions of emotion which seemed to be common worldwide, so that people from different parts of the world would be able to recognize a smile in someone else. So there seemed to be a universality about emotions. And so here's the question then. Here's a finding. Yes, we can recognize emotions. How about turning that into a skill? How well do we recognize emotions in other people? And that's what Salovey and Mayer did. They said, all right, now all of these research findings, let's turn them into skills or abilities. And someone who's very good at all of these things, we would say they are emotionally intelligent. Get the idea? They thought it was a pretty good idea. They couldn't get this paper published. So this journal here that it's published in is not one of the big high-up journals. It's not Nature or Science. They had to shop this around. This was an idea whose time hadn't quite come yet. It did, however, come 5 years later with this book. And I'll pass this around as well. If that could also come back to me, I'd be grateful. By Daniel Goleman, who was a science writer for the New York Times. And he knew about Salovey's research, and then he went around and interviewed a lot of researchers who were working on emotions, and he wrote this book, Emotional Intelligence. And it was such a wow that it made front page in Time magazine. In EQ, is it more important than IQ? So the reason this book was very successful, shamefully more successful than my book, which I'm passing around, even although mine's a better book. The reason it was so successful, I think, is two things. One of them is this thing here. It argued that emotional intelligence was more important than IQ for almost everything you can think of. You know, whether you get a good job, whether you can have a happy relationship, whether you find your life satisfying. IQ may bear on some of those things, but the real thing you have to have, says Goleman, is EQ. Now, the other thing that made it successful is that whereas IQ is thought of as fixed and genetically specified, emotional intelligence is something that you can acquire, argued Goleman. Okay, so let's go into a bit what is the subject matter of emotional intelligence. What Salovey and Mayer did is to divide emotional intelligence up into four aspects that they call branches. And the first is about perceiving emotion. How good are you at identifying emotion in yourself? How good are you, and this was my example before, at identifying emotion in other people? If you have got some emotion or you want to express some emotion, how well do you express it to other people? Can you tell the difference between someone expressing an emotion in a straightforward way and someone who's having you on, or a confidence trickster. All right? So what I'm going to do with each of these branches then is to give you an example that I happen to find interesting of some psychological work on that. So how about recognising emotions in ourselves? Now I think one of the really interesting pieces of work on this was done by a woman called Joanna Field, who did a degree at Bedford College in London in the 1920s. She then went to work as an industrial psychologist. And then she started to think, now, I'm not sure I'm really understanding how my life is going, or what, I mean, I want to be happy. Sounds a bit American, that, doesn't it? You know, I have the right to the pursuit of happiness, but I'm really not quite sure what makes me happy and what doesn't. So what she decided to do is to keep a diary of when she felt happy and then what had contributed to that, what had led up to it. And what she thought is she would do this for a while and then she'd say, all right, now these are the facts of my life. Maybe if happiness isn't that important, I will find out about that. But if it is, I'll be able to see what it is that makes me happy and what doesn't. Sounds simple? In fact, it was a project that took her many years. I can't remember now, but 7 or 8 or 10 or something like that. Because what she found is a lot of very puzzling things. Perhaps most importantly what she found is the pervasiveness in her of anxieties of various kinds. She called them blind thoughts, and she would be worrying about maybe what somebody would think, or if, when she was at a meeting like this, if she asked a question and found herself sounding silly. She wanted to be admired, but then often when she was out, she would be full of fear and not able to say anything at all. And then she started finding, well, if I want to be important, how can I possibly go around behaving like that? So what she did, in fact, was to track her emotions over a long period of time and then start to work out how important these thoughts of anxiety are, not the big ones like when you nearly get run over, but the ones that are sort of hovering on the edge of consciousness. Now, in fact, this idea subsequently became extraordinarily important. It's the basis for the most successful kind of therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, which is the most successful kind of psychotherapy for depression and some kinds of anxiety. And here she was in the 1920s working this out. In fact, she changed her career and became quite a famous psychoanalyst in London. Her real name is Marion Milner, and you can read her psychoanalytic writings there. But here's someone, you see, struggling with this question of how to recognise our own emotions. Okay, so Salovey and Mayer's second branch is how do you use emotions to facilitate thought? Sorry, I've gone 2 at a time. Using emotions to facilitate thought. So can you use your emotions to think better? Can you use your emotions to remember things? Because it's known, for instance, in psychology, that if you try and remember a happy incident, then actually you need to be in a happy mood to do that. If you're in a grumpy, sour, or angry mood, then those incidents don't come to mind. Can you use mood swings to understand other people's emotions? Is there a way of using your emotions to help creativity? So the researcher who really started this line of thinking was a woman called Alice Ison. She's at Cornell University.